The ache in my leg was a dull, familiar throb, a barometer for more than just the weather. Today, it was tuned to the impending social pressure. I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, not to admire the reflection, but to assess it like a tactical objective. The woman staring back was 32, her face a little thinner than it had been 2 years ago, her brown eyes holding a stillness that civilians sometimes mistook for calm. I knew it for what it was, a controlled perimeter. I smoothed the fabric of my simple navy blue sweater, a civilian uniform chosen for its ability to conceal and deflect. Underneath, a network of ridged, shiny skin mapped a geography of pain across my ribs and abdomen, a hidden testament to the day my old life ended. I practiced a smile. It felt tight, unnatural, like a piece of equipment that didn't fit right anymore. "You ready, Evie?" Liam's voice floated down the hall, warm and easy. His footsteps were light on the hardwood, a contrast to the deliberate, slightly weighted cadence of my own. "Just about," I called back, my voice purposely bright. He appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. At 34, he still had the earnest look of the history teacher he was, his face open and kind. He held his car keys, jangling them softly. Dad texted, "Mom's putting the roast in now, so timing should be perfect." "Perfect," I echoed, the word tasting like ash. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. Our eyes met in the mirror. His were the color of warm whiskey, full of an affection that, even after all this time, could still surprise me with its intensity. He saw the woman he married, the captain, the survivor. His father saw a complication, a deviation from the natural order. "It'll be fine," he murmured, kissing my temple. "He's been in a good mood lately, took up woodworking, made a very lopsided birdhouse." I managed a genuine smile at that. A manly pursuit, he should be thoroughly satisfied with himself. Liam's smile tightened slightly. He heard the edge in my voice, the one I tried so hard to sand down for these monthly pilgrimages to his parents' house. He was the peacemaker, the bridge between the world I came from and the one I'd married into. It was a fragile structure, and I knew the weight of it strained him. "He means well, Evie. He comes from a different time." "I know," I said, turning in his arms to face him. I reached up and straightened the collar of his shirt, a simple domestic gesture that felt like an anchor. "And I love your mom, it's just one dinner." It was the mantra I repeated every month, just one dinner. The drive to his parents' house was a quiet ritual. I stared out the window at the neat suburban streets, so orderly and safe. It was a world away from the dust-choked roads of Kandahar, but sometimes, a sudden backfire or the smell of burning trash could yank me back so violently I'd break out in a cold sweat. Liam kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on my knee, his thumb making absent, soothing circles. He didn't remember the ambush, the reason for my leg and the scars, and the panic that sometimes stole my breath. The IED that shattered our Humvee and my career had given him a severe concussion, erasing the memory of those minutes. He only knew what the after-action report said, that Captain Vance had extricated her unconscious sergeant, him, from the burning vehicle while under fire, sustaining significant injuries in the process. He knew the facts, but he'd never seen the footage burned onto the back of my eyelids. Sometimes I was glad. It was my burden to carry, not his. Robert and Sarah's house was a testament to his life's work, a solid, 2-story brick colonial on a generous lot, built with the same no-nonsense durability he valued in everything. The lawn was impeccably manicured, the hedges trimmed into severe, geometric shapes. It was a house that demanded order. Sarah opened the door before we even reached the top step, her face breaking into a warm smile that reached her eyes. "There you two are. Come in, it's getting chilly." She embraced Liam, then turned to me, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and roast beef. Her kindness was a genuine warmth in the often frigid atmosphere of the house. "You look tired, Evelyn. Are you getting enough sleep?" she asked, her voice laced with quiet concern. "I'm all right, Sarah, just busy," I lied smoothly. My nightmares weren't dinner table conversation. We moved into the living room, where Robert sat in his worn leather recliner, the king on his throne. The television was tuned to a news channel, but he muted it as we entered. He was a large man, his frame still solid from decades of physical labor, though a slight punch now strained the buttons of his flannel shirt. His hair was a thick, steely gray, and his gaze was direct, appraising. "Liam, Evelyn," he said with a curt nod. That was the full extent of his greeting. "Dad," Liam clapped him on the shoulder. "How's the birdhouse empire coming?" Robert grunted. "Damn squirrels are a menace, need to get a proper pellet gun." He shifted his gaze to me. "You're walking better." It wasn't a question, but a statement of observation. A performance review. "Physical therapy helps," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Good, gotta keep at it. Strength is everything." The unspoken part of that sentence hung in the air. "Something you lack." I simply nodded and took a seat on the sofa beside Sarah. Dinner was a similarly orchestrated affair. The dining room table was laid with Sarah's good china, a relic from the 80s that Robert was oddly proud of. The conversation orbited safe topics: Liam's students, the upcoming school levy vote, the relentless march of neighborhood gossip. Robert held court, offering opinions on property taxes and the declining quality of local contractors. I ate my roast beef and potatoes, focusing on the simple mechanics of chewing and swallowing, keeping my responses minimal and polite. It was during a lull, as Sarah was passing around a bowl of green beans, that the trap was sprung. The television in the adjoining living room, still on mute, showed a news segment about a local award ceremony. "Oh, turn that up, Sarah," Robert said, pointing his fork at the screen. "Saw this earlier, firefighter getting a commendation." Sarah found the remote and unmuted the TV. A young woman with a serious expression and bright red hair was shaking the hand of the mayor. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Firefighter Anna Flores honored for rescue in warehouse blaze." "Look at that," Robert said, a note of approval in his voice. "Brave kid, that warehouse was fully involved, took guts to go in there." "She's a hero," Sarah agreed softly. "Damn right she is," Robert said. He took a long swallow of iced tea and leaned back in his chair, his chest puffing out slightly. And then he continued, his voice taking on the tone of a man stating an irrefutable fact of physics. "But let's be honest, the real heroes, the ones consistently running into burning buildings, facing down the worst of it, they're men. It's just biology, upper body strength, the sheer physicality of it. It's a fact of life." The air left the room. The only sound was the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I felt my knife and fork become dead weights in my hands. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, on the congealing gravy around my potatoes. "Don't engage. Do not engage. It's a trap." I could feel Liam's tension from across the table. "Well, she certainly seems capable," Liam said, his voice strained as he gestured toward the television. "They have rigorous physical tests for a reason, Dad. She passed them all." "Oh, I'm sure the tests are plenty rigorous," Robert said, waving a dismissive hand. "But a test is one thing, the real world is another. When the heat is on, literally, you need raw power. It's not an opinion, son, it's nature." He looked directly at me then, as if inviting me to contradict him. "Wouldn't you agree, Evelyn? In your line of work, you must have seen the difference." My line of work, the one he never asked about, the one he referred to with a vague, almost dismissive wave of his hand. The one that had left me with a titanium rod in my femur and a mind full of ghosts. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I saw, for a blinding second, not the dining room, but the inside of the Humvee. The deafening roar. The smell of diesel and blood and burning plastic. The weight of Liam's unconscious body as I dragged him, my own legs screaming in protest. Every ounce of strength I possessed, every bit of training, focused on that single, impossible task. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the glass cool against my suddenly dry lips. "I saw a lot of things, Robert," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Bravery isn't always about the size of your biceps." Robert barked a short laugh, not unkindly, but with the certainty of a man who has never had his fundamental worldview challenged. "Isn't it, though? When a beam is about to fall, or you need to kick down a door or carry a 200-pound man out of harm's way, it's about brute force. That's a man's domain, always has been." The 200-pound man, the coincidence was so perfect, so cruel it felt scripted. My eyes flicked to Liam. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He knew. He remembered the weight, even if he didn't remember the event. "I think," Liam said, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension, "that we should talk about something else." How about those Cubs, Dad? Think they have a shot this year? The change of subject was clumsy, a life raft thrown into a stormy sea. It landed with a thud. An awkward silence descended, thick and suffocating. Robert looked momentarily surprised by Liam's tone, then slightly offended. Sarah looked down at her lap, her hands folded tightly. The Cubs are a disappointment, same as every year, Robert muttered, but the wind had gone out of his sails. The conversation was dead. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "Please excuse me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I just need to use the restroom." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the dining room, my gait careful, measured, each step sending a jolt of pain up my leg that I welcomed. It was a real physical sensation to anchor me against the storm raging inside. I could feel 3 sets of eyes on my back. Liam's, full of helpless frustration. Sarah's, brimming with unspoken sympathy, and Robert's, likely baffled by the sudden sensitivity of everyone around him. I found the guest bathroom down the hall and locked the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, closing my eyes and breathing in the sterile, lemon-scented air. The silence was a relief. I moved to the sink, gripping the cool, porcelain edges with both hands, my knuckles turning white. I raised my head and stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked back, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed her. They held a storm of memory and pain. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled up the hem of my sweater, peeling the soft wool away from my skin. There, in the unforgiving fluorescent light, were the scars. A long, jagged line across my lower abdomen from the emergency surgery. A patch of shiny, grafted skin on my ribs. A roadmap of the day I had done the impossible. The day I had used every ounce of my strength, not to kick down a door, but to tear one off its hinges. Not to avoid a falling beam, but to pull my husband from beneath the twisted wreckage of one. The day I had carried a 200-pound man out of harm's way. Robert's words echoed in my head, brute force, a man's domain. I saw it all again, not as a flashback, but as a crisp, brutal memory. The grit in my teeth, the acrid smoke stinging my eyes, the deafening cracks of sniper fire. The sheer, agonizing weight of Liam's body as I hauled him across 50 yards of broken ground, my legs screaming, my vision blurring, my only thought a single, repeating command. Move, move, move. A hero, I never felt like one. I felt like a soldier doing her job. I felt terror and pain and a desperate, primal love. But in Robert's simplistic world, the world of burning buildings and physical tests, what I had done was, by his own definition, the act of a hero. A real hero. But I could never tell him. To say the words would be to shatter the fragile peace Liam worked so hard to maintain. It would be an act of aggression, and I was too tired for another war. So the evidence remained hidden under a navy blue sweater, the story locked behind a stoic face. The heroism he lauded in abstract was the very same he denied in the flesh-and-blood woman standing in his guest bathroom. The disconnect was a chasm, and I was stranded on one side, alone with the truth. I let the sweater fall back into place, smoothing it down. The reflection was just a woman again, a quiet, tired woman at a family dinner. I turned on the cold water, splashed my face, and practiced my smile one more time. It was time to go back to the table. The heat came first. Not the dry, baking heat of a desert afternoon, but a wet, suffocating heat that clung to my skin and filled my lungs with every ragged breath. The smell of diesel fuel and scorched metal was so thick I could taste it, a bitter, coppery film on my tongue. Smoke stung my eyes, reducing the world to a hellish orange-gray haze. I was back there. The weight of my body armor was a familiar, crushing burden, the grit of sand and pulverized concrete grinding under my boots. Shouts and the staccato percussion of gunfire were muffled, distant, as if heard from the bottom of a well. My own heartbeat was louder, a frantic drum against my ribs. "Vance, get them out." The voice was Marcus's, raw with urgency. I turned, my movements sluggish against the pressure of the air itself. The Humvee was a wounded beast, listing to one side, its front end swallowed by flame. The acrid scent of burning rubber and something sweeter, more terrible, made my stomach clench. Liam, he was in there. My legs carried me forward, a clumsy, dream-slow run. The heat from the flames licked at my face, a promise of pain. I could see him through the cracked windshield, slumped against the steering wheel. Unmoving. A dark stain bloomed across the shoulder of his uniform. Then I was at the door, my hands fumbling with the handle. It was searing hot, the metal branding my palm, but the pain was a distant thing, an echo. I wrenched it open. The roar of the fire swelled, a hungry beast. I reached in, my fingers hooking under the straps of his body armor. I braced my bad leg, the one that always ached with a phantom warning, and pulled. His weight was immense, a dead weight that threatened to pull us both back into the inferno. My muscles screamed, the old scars on my torso pulling tight as cables. I gritted my teeth, a sound tearing from my throat that was half grunt, half sob. I dragged him free, his boots scraping against the torn metal floor. We collapsed onto the hard-packed earth, the impact jarring up my spine. I rolled him onto his back, my hands patting his face, his chest. Liam, look at me." His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the feel of his stubble under my fingertips, to the desperate need to see his chest rise and fall. A shadow fell over us. I looked up, expecting Marcus, expecting help, but the figure was wrong. Taller, broader, his features blurred by the smoke. It was Robert Vance. He wasn't in uniform. He wore his old canvas work jacket, his face a mask of cold disapproval. He looked from the burning vehicle to me, crouched over his son, and he shook his head. "This is no place for you," he said, his voice not a shout but a low, carrying condemnation that cut through the chaos. "You were supposed to protect him. This is what happens when you forget your place." I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my throat was sealed shut, filled with the smoke and the shame. He reached down, not for me, but for Liam, his hands closing around his son's arms as if to take him from me. A possessive, final gesture. I woke up. The transition was violent. One moment I was choking on smoke, the next I was gasping in the cool, still air of our bedroom. The sheets were tangled around my legs, damp with sweat. My heart hammered against my sternum, a frantic, trapped bird. I pressed the heel of my hand hard against the worst of the scars, a ridge of tight, angry tissue just below my ribs, as if I could physically push the memory back inside. Liam slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and even. A sliver of moonlight cut across his face, highlighting the peaceful set of his jaw. He had no memory of the rescue, only the official report and my terse, clinical summary. The weight he remembered was the weight of a hospital bed, not the dead drag of his body from a burning wreck. I watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, a ritual I performed most nights, a silent confirmation that he was here, he was safe. That I had, in the end, done my job. The nightmare's residue clung to me, a fine grit of fear and adrenaline. I slipped out of bed, my bad leg protesting with a sharp twinge as my feet hit the floor. I limped to the bathroom, not turning on the light. I didn't need to see my face in the mirror, the ghost of that other Evelyn staring back. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it a grounding anchor in the present. The dream Robert's words echoed in the quiet. You were supposed to protect him. By the time the sky began to light into a soft gray outside the window, I had the coffee brewing and my breathing under control. The controlled rhythm of the morning, measuring the grounds, pouring the water, was a meditation. When Liam padded into the kitchen, his hair sticking up in every direction, the normalcy of the scene was almost convincing. "You're up early," he mumbled, wrapping his arms around me from behind and burying his face in my neck. His warmth was a comfort, but it also sent a fresh pang of guilt through me. He carried his own version of that day, a version where he was the victim I'd saved. He didn't carry the weight of my failure, the leaden truth that it was my command, my convoy, my responsibility that had put him in that vehicle in the first place. "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I poured him a mug of coffee, black, the way he liked it. He took the mug, his eyes searching my face. "The dinner wasn't that bad, was it? I thought Dad was almost civil." I gave a short, dry laugh. Civil for Robert is not throwing his steak knife at the wall. It was fine, Liam. It hadn't been fine. It had been the usual minefield of backhanded compliments from Robert about my interesting career choice and Liam's patience. Sarah had tried to steer the conversation to safer waters, her eyes meeting mine with a silent, shared understanding, but the tension had been a physical presence at the table, a fifth guest nobody acknowledged. "See, fine." He took a sip of coffee. "Maybe we should skip the next one, just us, order takeout, make a fort in the living room." The offer was tempting. A night without the performance, without bracing for the next subtle dig. but something in me rebelled against the idea. Hiding felt too much like conceding. Robert's worldview, the one where I was a complication to be managed, would win by default. "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. I softened my tone. "No, it's okay. Your mom would worry. We'll go." Liam studied me for a long moment, his teacher's gaze seeing more than I wanted him to. "Okay," he said finally. "But if he starts in on the 'when are you two going to give us grandchildren' lecture, I'm faking a seizure." "Deal." Later that week, I met Marcus for coffee. The place was his pick, a no-frills cafe near the old base, populated by a mix of students from the nearby community college and veterans who, like us, seemed to find a certain comfort in the utilitarian atmosphere. Marcus was already there, seated at a small table in the corner, 2 mugs of black coffee steaming in front of him. He stood as I approached, a old habit he'd never shaken. "Captain," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Sergeant," I replied, sliding into the chair opposite him. The familiar exchange was a touchstone. With Marcus, I was still Captain Vance. Not Liam's wife, not Robert's difficult daughter-in-law, just me. He looked the same as he always did. Close-cropped hair, a solid, dependable presence that took up space without trying. His eyes, however, missed nothing. They scanned my face now, and I knew he saw the shadows under my eyes, the tight set of my jaw. "Rough week?" he asked, pushing one of the mugs toward me. "The usual." I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter, exactly what I needed. "The usual with you is rougher than most people's worst-case scenario," he said, not unkindly. He leaned back in his chair. "How's the civvy life treating you?" "Liam good." "Liam's great," it was the truth. He's trying." "And the in-laws?" I shrugged, a non-answer he saw right through. "He still doesn't know, does he?" Marcus's voice was quiet, but the question landed like a punch. I didn't have to ask what he meant. I shook my head, staring into the dark depths of my coffee. What would be the point, Marcus? To make him look at me and see the person who dragged his bleeding son through a firefight? To give his father more ammunition? "See, I told you she's unstable." "The point is the truth," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The point is, you don't have to carry that alone. He's your husband. He deserves to know what you did for him. He knows I saved him. That's all he needs to know." "Is it?" Marcus held my gaze. "Or is it all you can bear to tell him?" I looked away, my eyes tracing the cracks in the vinyl tabletop. He was right, of course. The secret was a wall I'd built, brick by brick, to separate the woman Liam married from the soldier who had failed. Letting him see the raw, unvarnished truth felt like an invasion, a contamination of the fragile peace we'd built. "It's easier this way," I said, the words sounding hollow even to me. "Easier isn't the same as right, Evie." He rarely used my nickname, and it made me look up. His expression was serious. "That shit eats at you, I see it. You think you've got it locked down, but it's in your eyes, in the way you hold your shoulders. You're still standing post." The accuracy of his observation left me defenseless. He'd seen me at my worst, covered in blood and dust, my voice hoarse from shouting orders. Dee stood beside me when the medevac bird finally took Liam away, his hand a steadying pressure on my arm when my legs threatened to buckle. He knew the weight of the ghosts I carried, because he carried them too. We talked for another hour, the conversation shifting to safer ground, mutual friends, his new job as a firearms instructor, the absurdities of civilian life. But his question lingered in the air between us, a challenge I wasn't ready to meet. When we parted ways with a brief, hard hug on the sidewalk, I felt both lighter and more burdened than when I'd arrived. The following Saturday, Liam was grading history essays at the dining room table, a fortress of papers and red pens, and I decided to tackle the one domestic duty I didn't entirely despise, organizing the home office. It was a small room we used mostly for storage, a graveyard for old textbooks, forgotten holiday decorations, and boxes of paperwork we were too lazy to sort through. I started with the filing cabinet, a task that required focus but not much thought. It was a good way to quiet the noise in my head. Receipts, bank statements, insurance documents. I created neat, labeled folders, a small island of order in the chaos, but the bottom drawer was stuck. I jiggled it, then pulled harder, my bad leg complaining as I braced myself. It gave way with a screech of protesting metal, revealing not hanging files, but a jumble of overflowing cardboard boxes. Tax records, 7 years' worth. Liam's meticulous nature warring with his pack rat tendencies. With a sigh, I hauled the first box onto the floor and sat cross-legged beside it. The dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light. I began the tedious process of sorting, creating piles for each year. It was in the third box, buried under a ream of mortgage statements, that my fingers brushed against something smooth and cool, something that wasn't paper. I pulled it out. It was a flat, rectangular object wrapped in a faded blue hand towel. A faint dread, cold and familiar, began to prickle at the base of my skull. I unwrapped it slowly, the cloth falling away to reveal a simple black frame. And behind the glass, the ghost I'd been trying to outrun for 2 years. The photo. I had thought it was lost, misplaced in one of the many moves after my medical discharge. I'd been almost relieved, but here it was, preserved like a fossil in this box of forgotten things. The image was grainy, blown up from a long lens, but the details were brutally clear. The background was a blur of smoke and dust, the hulk of the burning Humvee a pillar of fire on the left side of the frame. But the focus was on me. My face was turned partially away, streaked with soot and something darker, blood. My helmet was gone. My hair, short then, was plastered to my scalp with sweat and grime. Every muscle in my neck and shoulders was corded with strain. My expression wasn't one of heroic determination. It was a raw, animal grimace of pure effort. And in my arms, I carried Liam. He was unconscious, his head lolling against my armored chest. One of his arms hung limp, and the camera had caught the stark contrast of the bright red blood soaking through the fabric of his uniform sleeve, a vivid slash of color against the monochrome of dust and shadow. I was carrying him in a fireman's carry, his weight distributed across my shoulders. My bad leg was visibly buckling, the knee threatening to give way, but I was moving forward, one agonizing step at a time. The photographer had clipped the newspaper article and tucked it into the frame below the photo. The headline, in bold, blocky type, screamed, "Captain Vance's Heroic Rescue Under Fire." I sat there on the floor, the frame cold in my hands, and the world fell away. The smell of the office, old paper and dust, was replaced by the phantom stench of fuel and fire. The hum of the refrigerator became the whine of incoming rounds. I could feel the heat on my face, the unbearable weight of Liam's body, the gritty texture of his body armor strap biting into my neck. My breath hitched in my chest, coming in short, useless gasps. The pride the headline spoke of was a foreign country. What I felt was the terror, the crushing responsibility, the certainty that my body was about to fail, that we would both be consumed by the fire. But I also felt a fierce, undeniable surge of something else. This was the truth, not the sanitized version I offered Liam, not the source of Robert's silent judgment. This was the unvarnished reality of what I had done. The cost was written on my face, in the set of my body. It was ugly and brutal and mine. I heard Liam's chair scrape back in the dining room. "Evie, you finding anything good in there? A winning lottery ticket, maybe." His voice, cheerful and normal, came from another world. I quickly rewrapped the frame, my hands trembling, and shoved it back into the box, burying it under the tax returns. I shoved the box back into the drawer and slammed it shut, the sound echoing in the small room. "Just a lot of paper," I called out, hoping my voice didn't sound as strained as it felt. I stood up, my legs screaming in protest, and leaned against the filing cabinet until the wave of dizziness passed. I had spent 2 years trying to forget that woman in the photo, to lock her away in a box just like this one. But seeing her again, seeing the raw proof of my own strength and my own breaking, changed something. Marcus's words echoed in my mind. "You're still standing post." Maybe it was time to stand my ground in a different way. I wouldn't skip the next dinner. I would go. And the image of that photo, a secret weapon burning a hole in my mind, solidified a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. The ghosts weren't just in my dreams anymore. They were here, in this room, and they demanded to be seen. The ache in my leg was a dull, familiar throb, a barometer for more than just the weather. 2 weeks had passed since the first dinner, 2 weeks of Liam's careful silence, and my own coiled tension. The phantom scent of diesel and dust had finally receded from my nostrils, but the memory of that flashback lingered like a stain on the periphery of my vision. I'd spent the intervening days building my walls back up, brick by mental brick, the way we'd fortified outposts in the sand. but some breaches are too deep to ever fully repair. Liam was trying. I could see it in the way he moved around me, a little too quietly, like I was a skittish animal he was afraid of spooking. He suggested we cancel this second dinner, a peace offering I'd almost accepted, but retreat felt too much like surrender. Robert's worldview was a fortress I'd been skirting for years, and I was tired of the siege. I wasn't going to let him, or the ghost of that photo in my nightstand drawer, dictate the terms of my own home. "You sure about this, Evie?" Liam asked, pulling his car into the familiar driveway of his parents' neat, two-story colonial. The lawn was impeccably manicured, a testament to Robert's retirement hobby, everything in its place. "It's just dinner," I said, the lie smooth and practiced on my tongue. My fingers traced the cool glass of the window. "We can't hide forever." He reached across the console, his hand covering mine. His touch was warm, solid. "You don't have to just take it, not anymore." I looked at him then, really looked. The concern in his kind eyes was a tangible weight. He was my harbor, but this storm was one I had to sail into alone. He couldn't fight this battle for me. The terrain was foreign to him, a country whose language he'd never learned. "I know," I said, and squeezed his hand before letting go. "Let's just get through it." The smell of roasted chicken and thyme greeted us as Sarah opened the door, her smile a genuine balm. "Evelyn, Liam, come in, it's so good to see you." She embraced me, a quick, firm hug that felt like an apology in advance. Her eyes, the same soft blue as Liam's, held a quiet understanding. She saw the tension I carried. She'd been managing the source of it for 40 years. Robert was in his usual chair, the throne of his living room kingdom, a newspaper spread across his lap. He looked up over his reading glasses, a grunt serving as his greeting. "Son, Evelyn." "Dad," Liam's voice was neutral, a diplomat's tone. The dinner table was set with Sarah's good china, a ritual of normalcy that felt more fragile than the delicate porcelain. We took our seats, the same positions as 2 weeks prior. The conversation was a minefield of pleasantries. Sarah asked about my volunteer work at the Veterans Outreach Center, and I gave her a sanitized version, omitting the days when the mere sound of a slamming door sent me diving for cover under my desk. Liam talked about his students, a safe topic. Robert listened, chewing methodically, his comments limited to the food or a grumbled opinion about local politics. It was during a lull, as Sarah was passing a bowl of green beans almondine, that Robert found his opening. The news had been on mute in the background, and a segment about the military had flickered across the screen. "Saw they're talking about putting women in the infantry again," he said, shaking his head. He wasn't looking at me, but the comment hung in the air, directed at the table at large, a bait I'd taken too many times before. "Just don't see the point. It's not about equality, it's about biology. A man's body is built for that kind of stress. A woman's, well, it's just different. They're nurturers, mothers. They don't belong on the front lines. Complicates the whole damn chain of command." The words were like a physical blow, landing squarely on the old, bruised part of me that still screamed at the injustice. My knuckles were white around my fork. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my eyes on my plate, focusing on the pattern of the china. "Breathe, just breathe, don't engage." It was the mantra I'd repeated for years. But Liam's chair scraped back just an inch. The sound was small, but in the quiet room, it was a thunderclap. "Dad," he said, and his voice was different. It wasn't his placating, peacemaker tone. It was firm, edged with a steel I rarely heard from him. "That's enough." Robert blinked, genuinely surprised at the challenge. He looked from Liam to me, then back. "What? I'm just stating a fact. It's common sense." "No," Liam said, his voice low but carrying. "It's not, and you will not speak about something you know nothing about, especially not in front of Evie." Robert scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Liam, I'm sure Evelyn did important work. Behind a desk. Logistics, right? Driving trucks, necessary, I'm sure." He turned to me, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "You drove trucks, didn't you, dear? Important support role." The room fell silent. Sarah had frozen, her hand still on the serving spoon. The air grew thick, charged with a tension that had been building for years. I could feel Liam vibrating beside me, a live wire. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the lifetime of seeking his father's approval warring with his protective love for me. And something in me broke, not with a shatter but with a quiet, final snap. The walls I'd so carefully rebuilt crumbled not from the force of his words, but from the sheer, exhausting weight of them. The photo, tucked away in my drawer, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was no longer a secret, it was a key. I placed my fork down carefully, the click of silver on porcelain unnaturally loud. I didn't look at Robert. I looked at Liam, and I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's okay. I've got this." Then I pushed my chair back and stood. My bad leg protested, a sharp twinge of pain that grounded me. "Excuse me," I said, my voice remarkably calm. I walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. I didn't hurry. I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in a long time, a tactical clarity that bypassed the fear and the anger. I climbed the stairs, each step a deliberate act. The hallway was dim, but I didn't need the light. I knew the way to our old room, to the nightstand, to the drawer. My fingers closed around the cool, smooth wood of the frame. I didn't look at it. I already knew every pixel, every shadow, every grain of dust captured in that frozen moment. I carried it back down the stairs, a relic from a war Robert could never comprehend, and I felt a strange, cold power settle over me. They were all exactly as I had left them. Liam, standing, his hands braced on the table, his body tense. Sarah, her face pale with apprehension. Robert, leaning back in his chair, a smug, impatient look on his face, annoyed at the interruption of his dinner. I walked to the head of the table and placed the photograph down directly in front of him. The glass surface met the polished wood with a soft, final thud. For a moment, there was only confusion on his face. He glanced down, irritated as if I'd dropped a piece of mail in front of him. Then his eyes focused. I watched his face, my own heart a steady, slow drumbeat in my ears. I saw his gaze skate over the chaos, the black smoke billowing, the skeletal frame of the burning Humvee, the harsh, flat light of the Afghan sun. Then his eyes stopped. They landed on the figure in the center of the frame, on me. My face, smudged with soot and streaked with sweat, was contorted in a rictus of sheer physical strain. My jaw was clenched, my eyes narrowed against the heat and the grit. There was no fear in that face, only a ferocious, unyielding determination. My arms were locked under the shoulders of another soldier, his body limp, his head lolling back, his uniform torn and dark with what could be oil or blood. Robert's brow furrowed. He leaned closer, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He was trying to make sense of it, to fit this image of violence and desperation into his tidy narrative of women driving trucks and working logistics. His eyes flicked from my face in the photo to me, standing beside him. I saw the first flicker of dissonance. The Evelyn he knew, the one who married his son, who sat at his dinner table, was a ghost superimposed over this gritty, battle-hardened soldier. Then his gaze dropped to the soldier I was carrying. He saw the familiar build, the curve of the jaw, even in its slack, unconscious state. He saw the name tape on the uniform, mudded but still legible, VANCE. The color drained from his face. It was a physical thing, a slow leaching of life from his skin, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask. His mouth, which had been poised to make another dismissive comment, fell open. He reached a trembling hand toward the photo, but didn't touch it, as if it were radioactive. "That's," he whispered, the sound rough and ragged. That's August 19th, I said, my voice still calm, level, cutting through the thick silence. 3 years ago, outside of Kandahar, our convoy was ambushed." I pointed a finger at the photo, my hand steady. "That vehicle," I said, indicating the burning wreck, took a direct hit from an RPG. Liam was inside. Robert flinched as if I'd struck him. His eyes were locked on the image of his son, helpless in my arms. "They told you he was injured in the attack," I continued, the words coming out with a cold, factual precision. "They didn't tell you he was trapped. They didn't tell you the vehicle was on fire. They didn't tell you that the gunner was already dead and the driver was pinned." I paused, letting the reality of it sink into the room. "They didn't tell you who went in to get him." Sarah let out a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide, glistening with tears as she looked from the photo to me, a dawning, horrified understanding replacing her fear. Liam was staring at the photo, too. He'd heard the story, but he'd never seen the evidence. His amnesia had painted the event in vague, watercolor strokes. This was the high-definition, brutal truth. I saw the pain in his eyes, not for himself, but for me, for what I had carried. Robert finally looked up at me. The arrogance, the condescension was gone. In its place was a raw, bewildered shock. His worldview, the very foundation of his beliefs about strength and protection and gender, was collapsing under the weight of the 8x10 glosses. The protector in his family narrative had not been him, and it had not been his son. It had been me. "You," he stammered, "you pulled him out." "There was no one else," I said, and it was the simplest, most unvarnished truth of my life. The rest of the squad was providing suppressing fire. Marcus, my platoon sergeant, he was hit covering our extraction. The name tasted like ash. I got Liam out, just before the fuel tank blew. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence after an explosion when the world holds its breath. Robert's eyes dropped back to the photograph, traveling over every detail as if seeing it for the first time. The grit, the smoke, the strain on my face, the utter vulnerability of his son. He saw the unflinching truth of what I had done, what I was capable of. He saw the reality of my service, and it was nothing like driving a truck. I didn't wait for a response. There were no words he could muster that would matter. The evidence was there, undeniable, a truth more powerful than any of his opinions. I turned and walked away from the table, my leg aching with a pain that felt earned now, a testament. I didn't go far. I stood at the large window in the living room, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn, at the quiet, safe suburban street, a world away from the dust and the fire. I heard Liam's chair move. He came to stand beside me, his shoulder not quite touching mine. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a solid presence in the aftershock. After a moment, I felt his pinky finger hook around mine, a small, intimate gesture of solidarity, a lifeline. From the dining room, there was no sound. No argument, no apology, no sudden understanding. Just a heavy, profound quiet. I knew Sarah was still there, a silent witness to the shattering of her husband's certainty. And Robert was alone with the photograph, with the image of a strength he could never have imagined, a truth he could no longer dismiss. The battle wasn't won, but the field had irrevocably shifted. I had finally shown him my scars, not the ones on my skin, but the ones etched into the very core of who I was. And for the first time, I felt no need to hide them. The silence that followed the dinner was a physical presence in our house, thick and heavy as wet sand. For a month, it settled into the corners of every room, a constant, low-grade hum of tension that Liam and I navigated with the careful steps of people avoiding tripwires. He tried to bridge the gap with his father a few times, calls that were short and ended with Liam sighing, running a hand through his hair, the way he did when he was frustrated but trying not to show it. "He's just processing, Evie," he'd say, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. I didn't need him to process. I needed the world to stop feeling like it was tilting every time I thought about that photo, that single piece of paper Robert had used to pick a lock on a part of my life I kept bolted shut. My own days fell into a new, grim rhythm. The physical therapy appointments continued, a dull ache in my leg a permanent companion. Marcus checked in every few days, his texts a tether to a reality that made sense. "How's the civvy life, Captain?" he'd ask, and I'd type back something noncommittal. He always knew. "Stick to the mission, Vance. Your mission is to heal. Everything else is static." But the static was deafening. I was in the backyard, trying to lose myself in the simple, physical task of weeding the flower bed Sarah had helped me plant earlier in the spring. The sun was warm on my back, the smell of damp earth a clean, honest scent. My fingers dug into the soil, pulling up stubborn roots, the repetitive motion a kind of meditation. It was there that I heard the unfamiliar crunch of gravel in the driveway, a car engine cutting out. Not Liam, he was still at school. I stayed crouched, my body going still, listening. The car door opened, closed. Heavy, hesitant footsteps approached the side gate. I knew it was him before I saw him. The footsteps had a certain weight, a cadence I'd come to associate with disapproval. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees, my pulse a quick, tight drumbeat in my throat. Robert stood at the gate, looking more out of place than I'd ever seen him. He wasn't a man built for hesitancy. He was built for giving orders on a job site, for firm handshakes and unwavering opinions. But here he was, his large hands hanging awkwardly at his sides, his shoulders slumped. In one hand, he clutched a small, potted lavender plant like a shield. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rough. He didn't step through the gate. "Robert," I kept my tone neutral, wiping my hands on my jeans. The silence stretched between us, filled with the chirping of sparrows in the oak tree. Liam's not here. I know, he cleared his throat. I came to see you. That surprised me. I gestured toward the patio chairs. Do you want to sit? He nodded, finally pushing the gate open. He moved slowly, as if the simple act of crossing our lawn required immense concentration. He placed the lavender plant on the small glass table between the chairs, its purple spikes a sudden burst of color against the muted tones of the wood and stone. Sarah said you liked these, he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. I do, thank you. I sat down, the metal chair cool through my jeans. He lowered himself into the other chair, the structure groaning under his weight. He looked old. I'd never thought of Robert as old before. Stubborn, yes. Infuriating, absolutely. But now, in the bright afternoon light, I could see the deep lines around his eyes, the way his flannel shirt seemed a little too loose across his shoulders. Retirement wasn't suiting him. The loss of purpose was a vacuum I understood all too well. We sat for a long minute, listening to the distant hum of a lawnmower. The normalcy of the sound felt like a mockery. I haven't been able to sleep, he said finally, his gaze fixed on the fence line. Not properly, for a month. I didn't say anything, I just waited. He turned his head, and for the first time his eyes, the same shade of blue as Liam's but clouded with a pain I'd never seen in them, met mine. That picture, he said, the words seeming to cost him. When Sarah told me about it, I thought it was just some, I don't know, a medal ceremony something, I didn't think. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. But I saw it, last month. After you all left, I went into Liam's old room and I found it, in that box. The air left my lungs, he'd sought it out. He hadn't just stumbled upon it, he'd gone looking for evidence. I saw my boy, he continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. His face, he was just a kid, and the smoke, God, the smoke. He dragged a calloused hand over his face. And I saw you, Evelyn, your face, it wasn't a soldier's face, it was love, pure, terrified love. He looked down at his hands, clenched into fists on his knees. I'm a construction man, I've built things my whole life. Houses, buildings, I thought I built a life and understanding of how the world works. Men protect, women well. He shook his head, a gesture of profound defeat. I was a fool, a proud, stupid old fool. The apology was there, clumsy and raw, but it was real. It wasn't wrapped in excuses or justifications. It was an admission of a foundational failure. The anger I'd been carrying, a cold, hard stone in my gut, began to soften, not disappearing, but changing shape. You didn't know, I said, and it was true, but it wasn't an absolution. It was just a fact. I didn't want to know, the words burst from him, startling us both. He took a shaky breath, regaining control. It was easier to think of you as difficult, as not fitting, because if I let myself see the truth, I'd have to see what my son went through, I'd have to see what you did for him, and I'd have to face the fact that I wasn't there, I couldn't protect him. You did. He finally looked at me, his eyes glistening. You saved my boy's life. The words hung in the air between us, simple and monumental. I had never thought of it in those terms, not really. I'd done my job, I'd saved my team, I'd saved the man I loved. The two were inextricably linked, a single, brutal, instinctual act. But to Robert, it was a transaction of the heart he finally understood. His son's life for my peace. It was a debt he could never repay, and the weight of that understanding was crushing him. He's my husband, I said, my own voice thick. I know, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Evelyn, will you tell me, about that day? Liam, he doesn't remember anything, just what they told him afterward. And you've never talked about it, not to us. He wasn't demanding, he was asking, pleading. A part of me recoiled. The part that kept the memories locked in a steel box, the part that woke up sweating, the taste of diesel and dust in my mouth. To open that box here, in my sunny backyard, felt like a violation. But another part, the part that had carried the weight alone for so long, saw the genuine need in his eyes. This wasn't morbid curiosity. This was a father trying to understand the moment his son's life was saved. This was a man trying to rebuild his world on a new foundation of truth. I took a deep breath, the scent of lavender from the plant he'd brought filling my lungs. It was a calming smell. Maybe he'd known that. It was hot, I began, my eyes losing focus, seeing not the fence and the flower beds but the stark, unforgiving landscape of the Kunar province. The kind of heat that shimmers on the asphalt and gets inside your helmet, cooks your brain. We were on a routine patrol, Liam's unit and mine, coordinating. It was supposed to be simple. I described the dust, the way it coated everything, the sound of the Humvees, the casual banter over the comms. I kept my voice flat, a soldier's report. Then I told him about the first crack of the rifle shot, the way time seemed to slow and accelerate at once. The IED that turned Liam's vehicle.